Here's my take. Regular viewers know that I have not been a fan of Donald Trump's foreign policy in his second term. From threatening to seize Greenland and annex Canada, unilaterally raising tariffs sky high, to the fiasco of the Iran war, Trump has been reckless, chaotic, and deeply destabilizing. But he might well turn out to have the right instincts and perhaps even the right policy in one crucial arena, the US-China relationship. In Trump's recent interactions with Xi Jinping, we saw a version of him rarely on display. He was respectful, almost deferential, eager to emphasize their personal rapport. Xi, by contrast, remained formal, disciplined, and never especially warm. The asymmetry was revealing. Donald Trump is obsessed with power. More than ideology or values, of course, he thinks in terms of leverage and dominance. He insults European allies because he understands how dependent they remain on American military protection and access to U.S. markets. Trump senses weakness and exploits it. But with China, he has come to understand something that much of Washington still struggles to accept emotionally. Beijing has enormous strength of its own, economic, technological, industrial, even military, and can wield it effectively. So Trump has evolved from belligerence toward a more complicated mix of rivalry and cooperation. That may be what this relationship requires. Contrast Trump's visit with the first meeting of Biden officials with their Chinese counterparts in Anchorage in 2021. The Americans launched into a televised public scolding of China over human rights, cyber attacks, and the international order. China's diplomats responded angrily in kind. It was less a serious diplomatic exchange than a cable news shouting match. Many centrist Democrats live in fear of being portrayed as soft on China. So they often overcompensate rhetorically, adopting maximalist language and escalating symbolic confrontations. After showing skepticism toward Trump's China tariffs during the campaign, Joe Biden kept nearly all of them in place. Biden never visited China as president, nor did he invite Xi Jinping to Washington. The Biden team endorsed the claim, leveled by the first Trump administration, that China's actions in Xinjiang constituted genocide, a term that evokes industrial-scale extermination campaigns like the Holocaust or Rwanda. China's prison and re-education camps in Xinjiang are brutal and horrific, and dozens of scholars have called its actions against the Uyghurs a genocide. But as The Economist noted, it is not what most people think of when conjuring up the word genocide. Trump's superpower is that he cannot be attacked from the right. He came to power after the 2016 election, railing against Beijing, blaming it for lost manufacturing jobs, trade imbalances, and America's industrial decline. In a sense, the analogy is not Nixon going to China, but rather Ronald Reagan, the Uber hawk to the right of Nixon, going to the Soviet Union. Trump may be capable of a similar pivot precisely because his base will follow wherever he leads. One need only look at how quickly many MAGA figures reversed themselves on intervention in Iran once Trump signaled support for military action. Why would a more cooperative approach toward China make sense? Because the truth is that China is not the Soviet Union. The Soviet economy was smaller than Italy's by the end of the Cold War by one UN measure. China, by contrast, is the world's second largest economy, the leading trading partner for more than 120 countries, and a technological powerhouse in fields ranging from electric vehicles and batteries to drones, advanced manufacturing, and even artificial intelligence. It produces more manufacturing output than the United States, Japan, and Germany put together. Trying to launch a full-scale Cold War against such a country would not resemble the struggle against Moscow when the world was already divided. It would mean tearing apart the global economy itself. American consumers would face higher prices and supply shocks. U.S. companies would lose access to one of the world's largest markets. Universities would lose many top students. The danger would not simply be economic pain. It would be the creation of two hostile technological and geopolitical blocs spiraling toward increasing confrontation. Of course, the US and China are rivals. That is unavoidable in a bipolar world. They will compete economically, militarily, and strategically for decades to come. But rivalry need not mean total rupture. In the weeks before he died, Henry Kissinger noted to me that leaders of both countries should keep in mind how, in 1914, nationalist competition, pursued with no concerns about its consequences, led to a world war that upended the entire global order. In an age of AI, cyber warfare, and nuclear weapons, maintaining channels of dialogue and cooperation is more important than ever. The two countries should compete fiercely while still trading, talking, and collaborating where possible on nuclear stability, AI safety, pandemics, and financial crises. During the Cold War, Washington and Moscow maintained arms control talks even at moments of intense hostility because both sides understood that unmanaged rivalry could end in catastrophe. That remains true today. And if Donald Trump, for reasons rooted less in philosophy than instinct, has come to recognize this basic reality, then on this issue at least, his pragmatism makes sense. Joining me now to discuss the summit are Matthew Pottinger, the former U.S. Deputy National Security Advisor and the point man on China in Donald Trump's first term, and Jessica Chen Weiss, Professor of China Studies at Johns Hopkins School of Advanced International Studies. Jessica, let me begin with you and ask you, what was notable to you about this summit? What did you see that was, for you, striking?
Well, I think contra expectations that Xi Jinping was going to eat Trump's lunch. I actually think that the summit showed that what China really wants is stability, not to bury the United States or race for hegemony, and that in fact the priority that the Xi Jinping and his CCP leadership place on a stable external environment to continue to buy time for their own development amidst domestic economic challenges is, for me, the biggest takeaway that we should all be keeping in mind.
Matt, you wrote an article in the Financial Times, I think it was saying, beware of the gifts that Xi Jinping might bestow on Trump as kind of Trojan horses, a deal on chips, a peace gesture on Taiwan, investment in U.S. manufacturing. He didn't do any of those. Why do you think, and what's your read on the summit?
Yeah, look, Fareed, you said at the top that the Nixon moment in China is the wrong analogy, and I think you're right about that. But what I think the correct analogy is Nixon's policy towards the Soviet Union. That was the détente policy that was, understandable at the time why we pursued détente vis-a-vis the Soviet Union. We were stuck in a war that we were losing in Vietnam. President Nixon wanted to go into talks on strategic arms limitation with the Soviets. So he went towards a more accommodating sort of posture towards the Soviets. And I think this was really a détente policy in both directions, from Beijing and from President Trump towards Beijing. The challenge is to not let that policy become a parody of itself over time, which is what happened to the détente policy of the 1970s. The Soviet Union used that time to basically run buck wild around the world. They were launching insurgencies in the Horn of Africa and Angola and across Latin America, and even trying to start a revolution in Portugal. And so by the time the end of the 70s came around, the Carter administration, Brzezinski, saw the Soviets invade Afghanistan. He said that was the final nail in the coffin of détente. So détente became a parody of itself, and that's what we have to guard against this time.
Jessica, what do you make of that argument that, the Chinese are, as you put it, biding their time, building their strength, but they are continuing to build, military facilities in the South China Seas. They are continuing to increase the number of overflights to Taiwan and demand unification there. They are continuing to steal American intellectual property. In other words, there is a kind of, underneath the détente, there is a Chinese policy that is fairly aggressive.
I mean, I think it's quite clear that what China wants is to protect their sovereignty, to preserve the security of the Chinese Communist Party leadership with Xi Jinping at the helm, and to continue to develop into the sort of modern country that they have wanted. But I think the biggest threat here to détente is not that we actually get there, but that we fail to because of Trump's kind of volatile tendency to flip-flop, right? I mean, for example, after the summit, he said he welcomed Chinese investment and up to 500,000 Chinese students, but his policies and the Republican Party's policies have been anything but welcoming. Trump has, prioritized business deals over the kinds of economic gains that would make Americans' lives more affordable. And then, on Taiwan, he's been highly erratic, and I think that the essence of preserving peace and stability is, calm and credible assurances as well as threats. And he's, not been calm or credible, I think, on either score. In fact, he shouldn't be telling reporters that U.S. arms to Taiwan are a bargaining chip for economic or trade concessions. So I have a lot of questions about this, and I think that we do need a growing effort to avoid war with China, but whether he can get us there, count me skeptical.